Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Paymob Talks. I'm Osama Nasir, digital content creator at Paymob. Paymob is the fastest growing fintech in the MENAP region. We empower businesses by enabling them to accept digital payments. And Paymob Talks is a platform where we have honest conversations with our guests to uplift and inspire the youth. Today, we have a very special guest who runs the biggest Q-commerce business in Pakistan, Muntaqa Peracha. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum, Osama. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for taking time and be part of this amazing platform that we have created to have conversations to uplift the youth and to have conversations to just inspire people and get to know people beyond their titles. So, everyone has downloaded foodpanda app. At least I think this is one of the first app that I may have downloaded. And at least 8 people in this room would have downloaded the app as well. So how does it feel to be part of an organization that is exponentially growing and being the top of the ladder of that same company?
First, I want to find out who those people are who haven't downloaded the app and make sure that happens as well. I think it's about what we're trying to do, right? For us, it's very important to create employment in the country. And that's where we look at it from. It's not about delivering food. It's not about delivering groceries. Obviously, that's what we do. But at the end of the day, we are a logistics company, right? We are a last mile delivery company. So we want to make sure that we can add more opportunities over there. It's a humbling experience, and that's what we're trying to do from a country perspective. What impact can we bring to the country? How can we increase employment? Obviously, we have riders, we have our dark stores where people work over there, we have kitchens where people work, then we have restaurants who we can support. We can supplement their income by adding more revenue to them. So all of that creates a big ecosystem for us. So indirectly, I did a study once, indirectly we're impacting more than 1 million lives from an income perspective.
Wow. And before we get into the impact that we create, I want to understand how do you take this position as? Like when I see, being top of the corporate ladder is something that every corporate person dreams of, right? Has that something that always been in the plan for you, or did you take some concrete steps to be like, I want to be here at this point in my career? So how did that all work out?
So I've never thought of being in a certain position by a certain age or by a certain time. It's been more around what can I do today to make sure that I can contribute as much as I can so that the organization that I'm working for, that can grow. At the end of the day, if the organization grows, you grow, right? So that's been the sort of mantra so far in my life. I don't think anyone should be thinking that, okay, if you're a CEO of an organization that you've made it, right? That's just a start, because obviously the responsibilities increase a lot more. There's a lot more pressure. There's a lot more things that you now need to do, and you can influence as well now. So it's more, I look at it more from a starting point perspective. It's a start now. Now we need to see where we can take this organization.
And I'm interested that you said that, there are some myths and facts associated with being a CEO. So would like to, for our audience, say these things are true about a person when he's a CEO, and these 3 things might be myth. Anything that you would like to share?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the CEO doesn't know everything. And it's as simple as that, right? What the CEO needs to do is to ensure that they have the right subject matter experts around them to be able to take the right decision. I mean, that's at the end of the day what a CEO is doing. I think another thing that people maybe don't realize is that it is a bit of a lonely role, especially if you sort of graduate from within an organization and you're climbing the ladder up. Because when you're not the senior most individual in an organization, you can talk a lot more openly to your peers. You always have someone that you can raise your concerns to, because there's always a one-up for you. But if you are that individual, then you're obviously always at the receiving end, which is fine. That's not a challenge. But the other challenge is, if you want to talk to anyone, who do you talk to, right?
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing that I think probably took the longest time in terms of tuning myself to figure out a circle or a network where I can talk to people openly. Obviously, there are some things that cannot be discussed out of the organization either. So it's an interesting balancing act that needs to be done. So yeah, I think those are probably top of mind for me immediately.
Interesting, because I never thought of that, who exactly does a CEO go and talk to? Like, if he's having a bad day, because CEOs could have bad days, right? Like, it's not like they're not humans the other day. But this is interesting, like that you need to create that circle for yourself to be able to have that kind of space to be able to share. So I think one really interesting thing that I understood is that you need to surround yourself with people who can help you make that right decision. But a lot of times, and this is something that we have observed or thought of, that there are a lot of people who just want to say yes and be part of the good side of the boss, right? And not necessarily the answers are in the favor of the business, but just to be not being able to see the bad side or be on the bad side, right? And एक हमारा term है बहुत popular, like a Sethia culture, which usually thrives on जो सेठ ने बोला वही होना चाहिए, right? And of course, there are different settings, but just to understand that do you realize that maybe there may be a bias there when you do have that counsel? How do you decide to navigate through that and be able to make that decision that with the right input and everything that you have?
So I think there are two things to this as well. One is I feel the culture generally in the country as well is changing. So even if the so-called states, even over there, it has changed a lot. I hang out with a lot of these individuals who have hereditary, sort of inherited companies as well. And the approach that they have now is also very close to how a regular enterprise works. So that's a very good thing. Now, if we talk about our organization in particular, foodpanda, I think the culture is what drives this, right? So we've never had a culture of, a top-down sort of decision-making policy. It's always been bottom-up. We always encourage people to come and, break things a little bit. We always encourage people to speak up in discussions. Like, for example, we have our town halls, right? So in those town halls, some functions come and present every time, so we divide them up. Now, we can always have the director, which is the direct reporting line into me, present in every single town hall, but we don't do that, right? So that's sort of how to encourage people to take that ownership. So we have, people down the ladder as well who are coming out and presenting. They get the opportunity to stand up and talk to 700, 800 people. And then this is also streamed live across the Delivery Hero network. That's like 5, 7, 9,000 people. So they can also look at it from that perspective. So it's always been around that. If I look at our leadership team, I mean, I'm very lucky, to be honest, to have that leadership team. It's none of them, we're very different individuals. We have something very similar, which is obviously ethics and morals and no compromise on that. So that's the baseline. Beyond that, everyone is very, very sort of different to each other. And that's what makes the talk more interesting. Because an individual who might be heading a finance function, for example, may have a brilliant commercial idea, but in regular organizations, they may not get the chance to talk about it or pitch that up. In our organization, everyone can do that. So that's how we try to remove sort of like the yes sir culture in the organization as much as we can. I think we've been fairly successful at that. Obviously, there are instances where, the manager has to step in and take a veto because of some other information that might not be available to everyone else. But generally speaking, it's a very collaborative culture.
So, Muntaqa, I think one very important thing you've highlighted is the leadership team. And I want to understand, and this is for everyone who's watching, but especially the youth who do aspire to be part of organizations like foodpanda. So what do you really look for, and what should people be working towards when they want to be seen as in the leadership team? Because most what we have seen across is that people become managers, and then somehow leaders is not something that the definition that we see on LinkedIn, especially, and on books, it's not something that they really come down towards. So how do you define leadership, A, and moving from manager towards a leadership role? And what exact qualities do you look for when you are hiring for your own team at foodpanda?
So probably break it down into senior roles and junior roles or entry-level roles when someone is entering the professional life from university. So at that level, it's slightly different, obviously, because no one has been tested yet. So what you can do, and this is what we do, we have multiple rounds of interviews, right? So I'm a big proponent of panel interviews. I feel that they remove the bias of that one-on-one conversation, because I'll only be asking questions from one angle because that's what I know, right? So for example, let's take an example. Let's suppose I'm an introvert and I'm taking an interview. My questions will be very different as opposed to someone who's an extrovert and they're asking questions, right? So I'll only be able to test the candidate in one angle, while the other individual will be able to test the candidate in another angle. And if we do it separately, we'll never be able to share that information. And that's why a lot of times when you have feedback after one-on-one interviews, people have completely opposing views. And we're like, how is that even possible, right? It's the same individual, same organization, similar time frame. What happened? And this is what happens, right? So for senior levels, we do a lot of panel rounds. That's for sure. It is a bit of a tiring process actually for the candidate. I would love to make it quicker, but it is what it is. Unfortunately, we have to navigate across people's schedules. So we do those panel interviews to get that understanding across. And it's not, we're basically not testing the individual out on their subject matter expertise at senior levels. It's more around your leadership skills, how you sort of thrive in situations that are difficult, how you lead teams when things go bad. Because everyone can thrive when things are going well, right? We saw COVID, we saw growth in e-commerce. Whatever we touch turned into gold, essentially speaking, right? Now, how much gold you get is where the difference is, but everyone got a little bit of baseline response. So that's what we try to do. Remove the SME part, which is done in the first interview, and you're done with it. Then no one asks you questions around how you solved a particular problem. It's all about putting those individuals in situations where we can figure out how they react as a person on an emotional level, on a leadership level, on a passion level, on a guidance, mentoring level. If that comes out, yes, then that individual is the one that we need to sort of rope into the organization. At junior levels, it's obviously a lot more on the skill set, and then it's around the passion. Are they really coming to work because they really want to work for us and they align with what we're trying to do, which is creating that impact in the country? Or are they coming for a paycheck? I mean, there's nothing right or wrong either way. Because some people, anyone would obviously need a paycheck for sure, but then some people have a lot more requirement of that paycheck because of their family circumstances or the circumstances that they've grown up with. So that's fine. So we need to sort of figure that part out. So passion is extremely important for us because the kind of work we do and the kind of intensity we demand, you cannot sustain that if you're not passionate about the business.
Right. And you mentioned when you are hiring for a junior role, it's all become about the passion and the mindset. And what do you think that schools and colleges should be focusing towards? Because all these young grads, especially the Gen Z, they have their own way of working. And so we've seen on Instagram and on social media as to they need like a clear-cut 9 to 5. They understand their true values, but millennials may not have that kind of understanding. So schools and colleges, when they're looking towards, bringing the new grads into the work field, how do you think what schools should really focus towards to really make them successful into their careers?
So I actually don't think the Gen Zs have a 9 to 5 mentality.
Okay.
So their encouragement comes from different things, right? And the biggest one is they need to have a reason to come to work every day. That's what they sort of get motivated with. It's not about, again, like I mentioned, it's not about earning a paycheck. Yes, obviously that's there. But it's more about what am I doing every day that's contributing to the society in whichever way, right? We contribute in one manner. Paymob contributes in another manner. We may end up, the result might be the same, but the approach might be different because of the culture that we have or the sort of mentality we need. But the Gen Zs are very different, and we need to adopt to what they want rather than force-fitting them into, a desk job where they sit behind a desk and, do their work. That's not going to motivate them. Their work is not going to be as productive. So there's no point in doing that, right? So what's the point of having a tussle every day? But if we go to the academia side, but that's a whole new story, right? I can talk on and on and on about that. Fortunately and unfortunately. Fortunately, from a perspective, we see liberal arts now coming out very strongly in the country. We see universities that are only liberal arts, which is brilliant. That's important. But we see historically technical universities also branching out into the humanities and arts side. That's very important because A, you need to get that exposure as a student so that when you come out into the world, you're not going to have the same cookie cutter around you, right? Everyone's going to be different. So you need to have that exposure while you're growing up. If you don't have that because of your circumstances, for example, in school, then you can get that in university. So that's important. From an academia perspective, I think one of the things that historically we've seen is when an individual comes out from a marketing or a sales or this kind of a field, they come out that I want to work for a CPG. That's the mentality, because that's what they've been taught. Historically, the professors who used to come there as well have had some sort of affinity or linkage with the CPG industry. That is changing now, and it needs to change, right? We need to have professors that are more varied in their exposure. They're talking about more things, right? I mean, for example, 30 years back, everyone had to be linked to the CPG industry because that was the fastest growing industry, and it was contributing, sort of everywhere if you talk about consumer. Now you have to have that technology base. There is no way that you can survive in this economy, in this new world, without a technology base. So we need to marry that together. And that's where we need, and academia is working with corporate, so we're working with a few universities as well to try to figure out how we can contribute, maybe through keynotes, maybe through projects, maybe through internships, all of those things, which we are doing already. And now the question is, A, how do you make it sustainable? How do you increase this corporate pool so that more people get that exposure? And then C, what can you do more? And what can we do differently? I'm quite excited to see where we're headed. I think the students demand more as well, which is brilliant. Students ask questions. They don't take no for an answer, which is also very good. Historically, when I was growing up, we were discouraged in terms of asking questions. But now, I think my age group encourages our children to ask questions. So that's changing, right? So that helps.
So one thing I really want to speak on is the burden of making a decision and to have that responsibility, because each decision we take has its own consequences, right? And while we were growing up, we have your parents, you have your siblings, you make a decision, but very rarely you get a chance to make a decision by yourself. And few years later, you are now a CEO and you have to make a decision based on the right input, or sometimes you just have to make a decision because of your intuition. I want to know if there was a time that you had to make a really hard decision and there may be some opposing views, but you knew this is something you have to do. How do you navigate with that kind of discussion, or what do you do to ensure that, hey, I'm making this decision and it should be okay? Because a lot of times when we do it, there's a thing that we do at Paymob. It's like, we say, we'll sleep on it for a night, think over it, and maybe come to that decision tomorrow morning and see what exactly we feel like doing that day. But that's again a collective decision. But in your role, in your position, how do you think and ensure that this is the decision I'm taking, and it could be a hard one? So what do you do when you're in that situation?
I think there have been lots of such instances. So I think it's important. Well, it depends on the individual. So, I have a few approaches. Obviously, one is we have a phenomenal leadership team, right? So talk to them. That's always gives a new perspective. Then what one needs to do is one needs to have a network of confidants around you, a network of people who are experts at multiple things, right? Someone could be an expert in M&A, someone could be an expert in growth, someone could be an expert in turnarounds, whatever it is. So you have access to that network. That's very important. And that network does not get created in 1 year, 2 years. It's a process, right? You need to be in that state while you're growing up, while you're younger in the organization. You create a network within the organization that you work for, right? You have those mentors and coaches who can help you with multiple things, right? And it's important what you're trying to get out of them. So that's one thing that, I was taught at a very young age, that when you're approaching anyone, okay, hey, Usama, be my mentor. And it's not a generic statement. I have to tell him, okay, I like your content marketing skills. I need to learn that as well. Can we have that conversation once a month? There's 30 minutes to spend with me. Just teach me how that works. I'm not going to be an expert on it. Yes. But I'll have that exposure, right? And now if I'm getting that exposure 52 times a week, 52 times a year, multiply that by 10 years, I've had 500 conversations with you around it. I'll understand a lot of the things that I may not understand by reading just one book, right? And then you take that back, you're applying that to your regular life as well. So that network, to be honest, helps the most. Then obviously there's a network within the organization as well. Delivery Hero is in 74 countries. So we have a lot of senior leadership teams. So 74 countries multiply, every country has like maybe 5 odd, at least, directors. So, that's like 350 people right there that are a message away from me. So that's what I do. So for example, Egypt is a very similar country like ours. You guys would know that. There's a lot of things we can learn from them, and there's a lot of things they learn from us as well. The economic situation is similar. Everything is very similar. So that's someone I could reach out to, and we've done that conversations. So that's one of the ways that I particularly try to reduce the risk element. But at the end of the day, you will never have 100% answers, and you need to be able to take that call with slightly lesser information than you would ideally want. Otherwise, you will get stuck in analysis and paralysis, and every decision will get delayed by maybe a year, and that we cannot afford in the industry that we are in.
I'm really glad that you did bring this concept of mentorship, and largely it's still absent from most of our lives, especially if I speak for myself as well. I understand what the value of mentorship is and how it could value my own success and growth, but it hasn't really come to me that, hey, I should now go for it. But one thing that I would like to discuss further is on networking. And just yesterday, I was reading that 1.2 million people have left Pakistan, right? And everyone's wanting to move abroad, everyone's wanting to find a new journey, a new country. I want to know what is the advice? Because, and this is a question that I do like to ask all the guests, because we're seeing a brain drain happening, right? And when you look for good resources, you're like, hey, everyone has left. So advice for graduates who do intend to move abroad, what is it that they can do? Because like you said, it's a process. As you're growing up in a place, you know people and you create that network. That when you're moving, it changes a lot of things for you. So how does one or could take from that experience? And what could people and organizations do should we support that kind of a migration that is happening across in Pakistan? Or do you think there's still value in sticking around? How do you see this entire change that is coming in?
Okay, so migration is a tricky topic in terms of I cannot put myself in anyone else's shoes and say, hey, why are you going, why are you moving from Pakistan? There's still value in being here. So I don't want to talk about individuals, but I'll talk in generic terms, right? Is there value in sticking around in Pakistan? Yes. What can you do in Pakistan, right? If you stick around, what are the opportunities? Now, there are two ways to go about it, right? Either you create an opportunity by doing a startup, and we've seen so many of them pop up. Yes, people will say there's not enough money these days to launch a startup. I don't think that's the case, to be honest. The startup spring that we saw 2 years back, the amount of money coming in, that also was not sort of sustainable. So this had to happen. And startups do go in this cycle. So we've sort of touched the trough, I think. Now it's time to take it back up. But even in this situation, we've heard of funding coming in, right? And why did that funding come in? Because that startup had good unit economics. That startup had the right sustainable growth plan. That startup had the right mentality in terms of the founders. So you can still do that, be successful in this country. We have successful startups that are here. We are one of them. And you can take that forward. So that's one area. Second is, okay, I don't have the opportunity to launch a startup, or maybe I don't have those skills to launch one. And there's nothing wrong in that, right? I've never launched a startup, right, for myself. But I'm leading one, which is not really a startup now. It's more a scale-up, but it's similar sort of an industry. So that's completely fine if you don't want to do it on your own. Then you go and find opportunities where people, again, like I was talking about earlier, corporates are working beyond just earning, a profit, right? They're working towards bringing a change in the industry. So there was ride-hailing, right? It changed the industry. There's food delivery, it changed the industry. There's quick commerce, it changed the industry. So there are a lot of organizations like these that are changing industries, right? I mean, what you guys are doing is also very different to how a traditional financial institution used to work, right? Everyone had their own sort of brick and mortar char diwari, and no one would let anyone else touch them. You are completely different, right? You have those rails and you're like, okay, whoever wants to use them, just come to us. So that's a different sort of a scenario. So that's where we need to focus on. That's what I would recommend to the youth as well who are coming out. That things are not all bad. One difference that has happened is because of social media, now we know what's happening. Things probably were similar, maybe in different sort of extremes, but they've always been similar in the country, right? At least if I talk about the past 30 years. But we've been surviving, right? We've had those moments of excitement and exuberance and success and growth, but then there have been obviously downturns as well. Now we're coming out of a downturn. I'm a strong believer that we're coming out of that. So let's make something happen in the country, right? So that's one side of it. Now the other side, someone who just decides to go, that I need to go for various circumstances, right? Maybe didn't get an opportunity in the country and just wants to move. My advice to them would be, just please remember what you're trying to achieve when you're moving. Is it just, I'll just go out and just stick there, and send $1,000 back because I'll be able to save that much, and I have no plan? Yes, again, some people don't have the opportunity or the opportunity to think beyond that because of the circumstances they're in. But the people we're talking about are graduates of tier 1 universities. I'm assuming they would have a slightly more flexibility. So they need to really think what they need to do, what they want to do. Just don't go out there and grab the first job that you find. It can result, you're living alone. You have that pressure of sending money back home. You have that pressure of figuring out how to navigate this new country, new culture. You have to make a space for yourself because you're not in your home country. So it's very different. So there's a lot of things that you need to look at before you decide what job I want to accept. So don't accept the first job that you get. Align with their principles. Figure out what you're trying to do, what your aim is, and then have a bit of a plan and make it flexible.
Speaking of young graduates, there's this term, job hopping. And I would like to learn from you if there is value in sticking around for the sake of sticking around, because a lot of times people do hop around in 6 months, in a year, in a 2-year period. And people, what we've been told that this is not good, right? But people do it for various reasons, and sometimes we do feel like employers would understand. But as a CEO, I would like to hear from your view that how do you see when you have a resume in place and you think, oh, this man has switched 3 jobs in 2 years? How do you perceive that?
So there's always an unconscious bias, right? So as soon as you see a resume with 3 jobs in 2 years, yeah, you probably will form an opinion. That's true. But I think we need to move away from that. We need to still call the candidate in and find out what happened. There could be very logical reasons why they did that. And we should not cloud our judgment based on that, right? I mean, the resume is not about highlighting only your experiences and your achievements. It's about trying to figure out what the skill set of the person is and what the personality and character of the individual is. And you need to be able to get that across in a resume. I mean, that's very important for the younger people who are probably around the 5 years of experience. At that stage in your life, you're able to have a lot more depth in your resume than maybe obviously someone who's just out of college with no work experience. From a job hopping is, so I've done that, by the way. I've had stints in the middle where I've spent maybe a year only. And there were logical reasons for me to move on, right? It wasn't because I didn't want to work at that organization. It was more around the frequency, my frequency and the organization's frequency were not matching. Maybe we both thought that I bring something else to the table or the organization brings something else to the table, but it didn't match. And that's something you find out when you're actually in the organization and you work with them.
So you mentioned that at times you receive text messages related to, oh, good job on certain things. And foodpanda has been one brand that you will see on social media on a daily basis, on a group, on a Facebook post, and at times for very funny reasons that maybe not be too positive about the brand, but you do get to see them a lot because, of course, it's a very highly engaged business. I want to know maybe an instance or maybe a scenario where you may have received something which was like, what is happening across, and in the space of controversies or anything of that sort, how do you, when that situation comes in, what do you do in that moment right away?
Develop a thick skin and ignore. I mean, that's my standard response, right? We've had people accuse us of being the East India Company, for example. I mean, that's really creative. I would never have come up with that. it's just ignore. I mean, this is just white noise. It will always be there. You cannot respond to every single individual that's out there. Yes, if anyone has a genuine, I mean, whenever I run into any order-related issue, I always forward that to the team, and we make sure that we check each and every single complaint that's out there, because it's not about negative social media vibes. It's about, okay, an individual went out there, took the time to complain about us, we need to respond to them, right? So that's something that we do, but anything else that's out there is just white noise. We try to ignore it as much as we can, unless obviously someone is forced into a position where we need to respond, but that hasn't happened, to be honest. There's been various situations. We've had, restaurants reach out to us, they've started, they've had, historically have had complaints, but we've always been, okay, we'll hear your complaints out, and we're not going to respond publicly. Anything that we do privately. We do it in a manner that's not airing anyone's dirty linen. Because at the end of the day, if you come to a compromise, there will be some negatives on both sides, right? And then that means you're airing that out in front of the whole world as well. I mean, there's no need to do that. So just figure out what's white noise, what's rumor, what's just creative liberty that people have taken. Ignore that. Genuine concerns, yes, take those up. Make sure we investigate them to their depth.
And help me understand that, we see this up on socials everywhere, that inflation is 2 times high right now. How that has affected the industry that you operate in?
So I think the impact has been interesting. We did a few changes last year. So we went away from growth at all cost to sustainable growth much before everyone else started doing it. We took a call internally very, very quickly because we could foresee some things happening. We didn't foresee things happening at this speed, but we did foresee that, maybe in the next 6 to 12 months, it all got, our internal local macro challenges and the global macro challenges just sped that up a lot quicker. So it happened in 3 months, what would have happened ideally in 12. So we made some changes, which resulted in a very healthy business, to be honest. So our actually numbers have switched around the other way. So we have more people who are loyal to us. We have more people who order more consistently with us. So frequency has increased, stickiness has increased. The obviously average order value has increased, and that's something that's very important for e-commerce organizations, because we earn based on how big the basket is. So that has all increased. The growth has slowed down a bit, but we're still growing. So the interesting thing is that we are growing. We were growing at 1x, 2x, 3x kind of a speed, but we're not growing at that, but we're still growing in double digits, right? So that's what's important. And I for one, we've hit our highest GMV numbers this year, for example.
Wow.
And that's a very good positive sign. So that means that there's juice in the market. We just need to target the right people with the right sort of service and just make sure that that service is consistent so that people increase their frequency and stickiness with you.
And you mentioned that there has been a shift from cash payments to digital, right? And would like to understand, how do you think a player like Paymob could assist in the growth and foodpanda, and how we could work collaboratively to really help each other's purpose here?
So our teams are working on a few things that hopefully will, result into something positive for both organizations. But organizations like Paymob are very critical for us, right? Especially for Q-commerce and e-commerce companies. We are big proponents of moving away from cash. And organizations like yours, banking the unbanked, that's big. Getting that confidence in online payments, that's big as well. So traditionally, maybe people would get reimbursements on card payments in like 21 days, generally speaking, right? 14 to 21 days is the default, and that's a pain. Organizations like yours, for example, can solve that problem for a lot of people, right? It could be instantaneous because you have lesser challenges on that as opposed to maybe a traditional financial institution. So lots of things, financial inclusion, offline to online, digital payments, that I feel we've been able to contribute to that as an organization significantly more than what people really understand. For example, every rider that comes in creates an account, right? So it comes into the formal economy. So it's either a mobile wallet account or it's a fintech-based account. So he creates an account, right? And we've had 200,000 riders who work with us, right? Just in the past 2 years, for example. So there's 200,000 accounts where genuine white money is coming in. In the economy that's declared. So that's there. Then we've had restaurants. So we are in 35 cities in the country. So we have restaurants who never used to have a bank account. So we worked with a few financial institutions, with a few of the banks, and we've told them, okay, when we bring them in, please open their account within 3 days. So they get a 3 to 7 day onboarding experience as opposed to a 1 month onboarding experience traditionally. And these are places like Mandi Bahauddin, these are places like Mardan, the places like, Jhelum, Attak. So smaller cities, and immediately that impact can be then felt as well. So I think if I need to put a number to it, maybe 300 to 400,000 people have come into a formal economy just because they had to work with us.
And what is the current ratio of cash to card payments right now on the app happening? And do you see that momentum of card growth growing?
So we've 3x'd that in the past 3 years. So now we're around 40% online payments. I think we might be one of the higher ones in the industry of e-commerce plus Q-commerce, combined. That has been growing. So we've had a good push this year. We're integrating more partners on the app as well. So once that happens, I'm hoping that by the end of the year it's a 50-50 scenario.
And what's the benchmark otherwise? Of digital payments
in the industry?
Yeah, compared to Pakistan or maybe as Delivery Hero presents in Europe.
Okay,
so
compared to the other countries, so it's interesting. The countries that are more developed, there are places where 99% of the transactions happen online. Yep. So no one deals with cash at all. They just don't understand what cash is, to be honest. But if we talk about developing countries, so we are on the upper end of that. So countries that are, in a competitor basket like Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, Argentina, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia. So we are in the top countries there in terms of online payments.
So when we look at this industry, we have more merchants that are online, but only help, catalyze growth for both of us, right? When we go to a merchant, how do we rationalize the value over commission? Because we receive a lot of pushback into going digital. And how do you deal with that? And how should Paymob deal with that?
So we did an analysis internally in our organization to see how much a cash delivery costs us and how much an online delivery costs us. And even with the MDR that's there on online deliveries, which can be very high as well, on an average, a cash delivery costs us more than an online delivery. And there are reasons for it. And this is not just about a cost of a transaction. Obviously over there, online is slightly higher. But we need to look at it from a holistic perspective. So a rider goes to your house to deliver. Let's suppose you ordered something which was worth 4,000 rupees. You give a 5,000 rupee note. The rider does not have change, right? So first you need to figure that part out. So there's a delay there, which means that the next order that the rider can do gets delayed by a further few minutes. And then this has a trickle-on effect, right? So, and a rider spends, if I remember the number correctly, 4x more minutes at the customer for a cash order versus an online order, right? So that's why we push online so much, because we want the rider to just go there, hand the delivery and leave so that they can get the next order. They obviously will earn more. If they earn more, that means we are doing more deliveries as well. So it's just the cycle goes very, very fast.
I've had more success in paying online on apps like foodpanda versus a cab app. And if I'm not paying in cash, the driver or the captain will never show up on my doorstep. And I'm forced to cancel and put the request to get a cab and would want to pay in cash. So how do we make this change scalable and address that? Because as a consumer, I would love to just have my cab or my ride prepaid or paid, or then putting up into cash. And even in so many years, we haven't had that kind of change so far. So what can we provide to these merchants and users, especially on that side?
So I used to think that it's a trust issue, that people don't trust apps with their cards. That might be true to a certain extent, but for us, it turned out something different. It was more around access to an account that is linked to a card. It was more there. So for example, when we incorporated the first mobile wallet into our app as a payment, immediately we saw people who were paying cash previously switch over to this mobile wallet because they were already a customer and everything else, and it was just more convenient. And then when we had these new fintechs launch up, the X, Y, A, B, C, D pays of the world, when they came in, immediately we saw people switching to those apps as well, and to those cards as well, and they started using them. So now our top few financial institutions in terms of online transactions, some of them are these fintechs and not your traditional bank. So it was more around access to that account with a card than a trust factor. So that's something that we definitely need to do. So it will come with time. Once you have that spread out across, the demand has to be there for people to start accepting, for example, rides on cards, because everyone is doing it. Right now, I don't know, obviously I'm not privy to anyone else's numbers, but I would assume that their numbers would be lower than us from a card online payment perspective. So that means, if they have to reject 10-20% of the rides, they'll do it because it doesn't hurt them, right? So there's no point. So we need to create that demand.
And you spoke of putting up a wallet on the app, Panda Pay. What are the plans for that? Is it to increase your online payments and to get more customers? So what are the ambitions like?
So Panda Pay is something that we're really pushing quite aggressively now. We have lots of plans around that. But yes, you're completely right. The aim is to push online payments more. We feel that if our consumers have that confidence in us, they will keep on topping up their wallet. They can still use the cards, obviously, but we're pushing the use cases of the wallet a lot more. The aim is to have as many people switch to online payment as possible. It's just easier for them. It's quicker for them as well. For example, tomorrow, if they run into any issue and they need to be refunded, it's an immediate refund, right? And they get the money directly into their wallet. So there's no wait or frustration at that level either. So it just helps develop that ecosystem a lot quicker.
And speaking of the products that we have different products to acquire different merchants so that we can solve an issue. One of the products that is yet to be launched is called SoftPOS, which allows your mobile phone to turn into a POS machine. And that's something that we're very excited to roll out, especially in Pakistan. How do you think that in smaller cities or home chefs would benefit off from an app from Paymob, SoftPOS, where they could just turn their phone into a card accepting machine?
I think it's brilliant. It's the need of the hour. If we need to move people from cash to card, this is one way to do it as well. So you can still place an order on cash, but at the doorstep convert it into an online payment. And that's brilliant, right? That works really well. So if I look at it from our perspective, that's where I see value for us. And then it will eventually convince people also to move away from cash completely. Once they're able to do this at the doorstep 2, 3, 4 times, that's brilliant.
And my question would be, like, when you have these delivery riders, I've seen a lot of videos. One time there was a part where a lot of riders were at one location together. And I wanted to know, has there been any instance where you've received a request of an order for very high value? Has there been an instance where that was absurd and yet it was delivered? Or is there a limit to what the value of order can be done through foodpanda?
So beyond a certain value, you have to place an online order. It just makes sense, right? Especially for the restaurant partner or for the shop or for the mart, wherever the order needs to come from. Because if you give a 50,000 rupee order, for example, and I forward it to, for example, a home chef, they will need to create that, right? And then you take that delivery, you go to the doorstep and it gets cancelled. It's just really bad, especially for the home chef, right? Or anyone, to be honest. So we've had, I remember an order of 80,000 rupees of Habshi Halwa in Multan.
Right.
Yeah. And who wouldn't, I can understand why it was that's such a big order. I think there was COVID times. So we've had interesting, I remember an order of fish, the local fish in Punjab that you get, fried fish. I think again, this was in southern Punjab, around 50,000-60,000 rupees, because I think it was 2,000 rupees a fish or something, and they ordered 20 of them or something like that. And it was delivered. They
Wow.
needed it. They had a party. They ordered from us. So that also tells us of the use case, right? Of the confidence that people have. They trust us to be able to deliver that because this is something they prepaid, right? Imagine prepaying something 50,000, 80,000, 100,000 rupees and then waiting at home to have it delivered. I thought that trust level was not there in the country, but there are use cases there. So
Wow.
yeah.
I think I'm very excited what the future holds for us as partners and what we could potentially do in Pakistan in terms of contribution. Now we're moving towards a fun round, Muntaqa. And this was not part of the script, but now I'll brief you what it is. So it's called Guess the Price. Okay. We've picked 5 items that are most commonly used in a household. And you have to guess how much a kilo of each item would cost. And let's see if you come with the prices right. Okay, so first, are you ready?
Sure. One disclaimer though. So I use PandaMart to do all of those, right? And I trust the app to give me the right price. So I don't look at the price, but let's see.
Okay. Tomatoes.
90.
All right. It's in the figure. Good job. Yogurt.
Yogurt. 150.
I think yogurt is expensive. So I'll give you one more try.
Zyada महंगी होगी. Oh God. 200.
I think my range is pretty high though. Is it more than what I have written?
Oh,
it is, right?
Is this a kilo?
It is.
Sorry, I was talking about one box. So yeah, a kilo would be around 400.
Yeah. Third take, but good. Yeah, we've got it. Chicken.
Chicken. 600.
Under the benchmark. Awesome. Mangoes.
Mangoes. Well, it depends which one it is. Like, so it's 500 to 600 range, I guess.
You kind of buying expensive mangoes?
Yeah, I think I am.
And a dozen of eggs.
Eggs. That's a dozen eggs. Okay. I think 300?
No, very right. Yeah, 300. Which fall under the range. Well, this was it for the fun question round. Thank you so much, Muntaqa, for coming over and sharing your views and all the discussion we've had. Thank you for watching this episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. And let us know in the comments below who would you like to see next on Paymob Talks.